The Brothers Karamazov, Book 1, Chapter 3. You see, we're being introduced to all the main players in the introduction. We were introduced to the narrator in Book 1, Chapter 1, to Fyodor Karamazov. In Book 1, Chapter 2, Dmitry Karamazov. In this chapter, Book 1, Chapter 3, to Ivan Karamazov. And then in Book 1, Chapter 4, to Alyosha Karamazov. Now, Book 1, Chapter 3 first starts with Fyodor's second marriage. So we saw in Fyodor's second marriage, in Fyodor's first marriage, we saw that he married for money and she married for rebellion and for reacting to society and her upbringing. And we called Fyodor, we called him bad for that because, you know, we know that you marry someone for who they are, you marry for love, and you don't marry for money. However, it's not that bad. It's understandable. We can all see why someone would marry someone to help out their financial state. It makes sense to us. So it's hard to assign Fyodor too much evil for marrying Adelaida, Dmitry, little Mitya's mother, because she had some money. Now in this chapter, we see that Fyodor not only doesn't learn from his lesson, he not only digs to the bottom of the barrel, he picks up the barrel and looks underneath it. So what could be worse than marrying someone not because you care about them, but because they have money? What could be worse? Well, it could be marrying someone just because of their innocence and vulnerability, just because of your ability to exploit their childlike innocence. And in the case of Fyodor's second marriage, she's not even childlike. She is a child. So here is this 16-year-old orphaned young lady. Her life is characterized by meekness, beauty, innocence, and vulnerability. Why is she vulnerable? Because she's been orphaned, and she has a benefactress who is a mean old lady. And our narrator tells us that Sophia, Fyodor's second wife-to-be, really has two options: suicide or life with this benefactress, and neither of them seem especially worse than the other one. So her life is a living hell. She has a terrible life with a mean and nitpicky and controlling older woman, this poor orphan, innocent little lamb of a child who has this physical and spiritual beauty to her. She is just she's been dealt a terrible hand in life, and here she is completely vulnerable. So then this creepy old man, Fyodor Karamazov, hears about her, sees her, and he begins to pursue her just because he can exploit her innocence. He is attracted, she is everything he is not, and he's attracted to her for the most base, for the most crass, for the most offensive reasons. He thinks like a child abuser. He pursues her because she is most vulnerable. And poor Sophia doesn't have much choice on the matter because her only options prior had been this abusive benefactress woman or suicide or now this benefactor. So she rolls the dice and takes her chances, not that she has much choice in the matter anyway, and she's a 16-year-old girl, so she's probably not capable of making adult-like decisions anyway for her future. She marries the much older Fyodor Karamazov. And predictably, it's terrible, but it's probably even a worse marriage than you would predict, because he sees her innocence, he sees her beauty and vulnerability, and Fyodor just completely exploits it by having drunken orgies and adulterous affairs right in front of her, treating her horribly, so much so that he literally drives her crazy, makes her hysterical, makes her shriek, and drives her to a very early death. But before she dies, she is able to bear two sons, Ivan, and then 3 years later, Alexei, Alyosha. So again, Alyosha and Ivan are left without a mother. I say again because this is the same story that happened with the first wife, Adelaida, and her son, Mitya Dmitri. Again, Ivan and Alyosha are left without a mother. Ivan seems to be either 7 or 8 years old, and Alyosha is 4 years old. So he just barely remembers his mother. Poor Sophia. Poor Sophia, this innocent, vulnerable, bright angel of a woman who never had anything but either a abusive benefactress or an abusive husband. So she loses her mind, she becomes hysterical, and she eventually dies from the evil that is Fyodor Karamazov, leaving, of course, young, probably 7-year-old Ivan and 4-year-old Alyosha in the exact same position that Dmitri found himself in. Here comes our faithful. Maybe his personality isn't likable, but boy, are his actions likable. Here comes again our faithful servant Grigory to the rescue. He rescued Dmitri when he was 3. Now he rescues Ivan and Alyosha when they are probably 7 and 4 respectively. And once again, Grigory provides for the needs of these boys. And I forgot to say, protected their mother, Sophia, from Fyodor when she was alive. He stood up for her. The terrible benefactress, the abusive old lady that had raised their mother, Sophia, is still alive when Sophia dies because of Fyodor's evil. And she sees the sorry state that the boys are in. And so she did such a great job with her mother, I say sarcastically, she chooses to also help out and raise Ivan and Alyosha. Ivan and Alyosha move in with her, and a few years later, she passes away. Thank goodness that they didn't grow up raised with this abusive, mean old lady, but she has provided for their education, so she leaves money behind for Ivan and Alyosha to be educated. Alyosha sort of falls away from the picture. We're going to save him for the next couple chapters, and the rest of the chapter deals with young Ivan, and Ivan, predictably, without a father figure and with a mother who has passed away. Predictably, he is a serious young man, he is a quiet, reserved young man, and he's a genius. He is brilliant, he makes quick work of learning and school, and when he goes to college, he has thousands of peers in college who all have the same problem he does, which is they want to study and put the time into their schooling, but they also have to pay to live and pay for college. A situation that is still true today, and so it's a strain because you want to be a good student, but you also want to be able to live and eat. And Ivan makes quick work of that challenge and rises above all his peers because he can write fake news stories, or he can write real news stories from fake perspectives and then sell those eyewitness accounts to the newspapers. Once he gets his foot in the door as the writer, then he begins doing these brilliant book reviews, and the more book reviews he does, the more renowned he becomes. Then he starts writing scholarly articles. All of these things he's getting paid for, and all of these things are making him more and more well-known in literary and academic circles. Then he publishes an article on a field that is nowhere near his expertise. So Ivan is a brilliant young man, a scholar in the natural sciences, but he goes outside of that field and he publishes a scholarly article on the relationship between church and state. What are the role of civil courts and ecclesiastical courts? Where do the authority start and end in church courts and in civil courts? He has a surprising opinion on that matter, and not only is it surprising that he would even venture to speak on that matter, but what's really surprising is his thesis, and that is a major topic in the next book. Book 2 of the Brothers K is Ivan's thesis about the church's supremacy, the ecclesiastical court's supremacy over the civil courts. But that's not important right now. What's important is that Ivan is reserved, And in other words, he's not the friendliest, warmest fellow, but yet he is successful. And the reason he is successful is because he is a quick learner. He is a scholar in the literary world. He knows about natural sciences, and he can speak on theology and political things as well. The question, though, is, what is Ivan doing back in our town? It's clear from the last chapter what Dmitri is doing. Dmitri has been following this carrot all his life, that he will get the inheritance that is due his mother from Fyodor. So it's clear that Dmitri is back in town because he wants to collect on his inheritance from Fyodor. Ivan has never, for a day in his life, expected any sort of financial reward from Fyodor. Neither has he even thought of Fyodor. It seems like in Alyosha, in Ivan's mind, that Fyodor might as well be dead. It's not that they hate him, they just completely disregard him, it seems. He's just nothing to them. So the question the narrator poses is, what is Ivan doing back here? And then he tells us what Ivan is doing back here. Secretly, Dmitri and Ivan have begun a letter correspondence, even though they've never met in person until recently. They've begun a correspondence by letter, and the narrator doesn't tell us what that correspondence is, and that will play out the rest of the book. But that's the backstory that we don't know at the time. What is Ivan doing back in town? And more surprisingly, not only is Ivan back in town, but he's living with Fyodor for the last 2 months, and most surprisingly of all, they seem to be getting along quite well. So we saw in the last chapter that things were contentious between Dmitri and Fyodor, and things are surprisingly serene and swimming here in the chapter with Ivan and Fyodor. And so the reason is that Dmitri wants something, one of Fyodor's precious idols, money. Dmitri wants money from Fyodor, but Ivan and his abandoned dad, they get along quite well because Ivan has zero expectations. He doesn't want anything from Fyodor. Thus, he's not threatening, he's not scary at all to Fyodor because he realizes that Ivan doesn't need or want anything from him. So it's a little bit surprising to the outsiders that Ivan would get along so well with his father, and we'll see if that keeps up here as we move along through the brothers Karamazov.